When the news broke that Malcolm Jamal Warner had suddenly passed away, the world froze for a moment. Fans were stunned. Friends were shaken. But for Eddie Griffin, it hit different. The two weren't just celebrities in the same circles. They were brothers in spirit. Both emerged in the late 80s and early 90s. One a genius on the mic, the other a genius on the screen. And behind closed doors, they shared laughter, deep talks, and the kind of brotherhood that fame can't fake. They weren't the kind of pair you'd expect to see side by side on the red carpet. One, a master of rhythm and rage on stage. The other, America's favorite son from a household that changed TV history. But what most people never knew was that Malcolm Jamal Warner and Eddie Griffin shared something rare in Hollywood. A bond that wasn't built on contracts or cameos. It was quiet behind the scenes. And it ran deeper than most of us ever realized. They didn't meet at some flashy award show or over cocktails at a celebrity lounge. It was backstage at a benefit event in the late 90s, a moment between performances. Eddie had just gotten off stage, sweating, wild-eyed from a set that left the room in stitches. Malcolm had been in the back, clapping the hardest, and when they shook hands for the first time, it wasn't one of those shallow, "Hey bro," celebrity greetings. It was real. It was respect. From then on, they kept in touch, sometimes loosely, sometimes deeply, but always consistently. There was a mutual understanding between them. Both had lived through fame's golden cage. Both had felt the weight of being black men in an industry that either wanted you loud and funny or polished and safe. They were neither. They were both. And that's what brought them together. Malcolm had that quiet thunder. He wasn't the one to blow up a room with jokes or stories. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did talk, people leaned in. There was a stillness to him that made people feel safe. Eddie noticed that early on. He was the kind of dude that could calm a room just by walking in. Eddie once said in an interview nobody paid much attention to at the time. But you could also tell that stillness came from carrying something deep. They didn't hang out every weekend. They weren't throwing parties together or making TikToks like some of today's stars. But when they did connect, whether over coffee in LA, a late night call about the madness of fame, or just bumping into each other in an event, it always felt meaningful. Like two brothers catching up after surviving separate wars. They could go months without speaking, and then one call would last for hours. No pretense, just realness, pain, laughter, a shared understanding of what it meant to be watched by millions but known by so few. They both knew the cost of image. Eddie often played the wild one, unfiltered and censored, unapologetically loud in a world that tried to silence him. Malcolm, on the other hand, had spent years as the face of black excellence. Theo Huxtable, the golden child. But behind that legacy was a man who struggled like everyone else. Eddie saw through all that, and Malcolm saw through Eddie's bravado, too. That's what made their friendship different. No masks, no ego, just two men being themselves. There was a time, years ago, when Eddie was going through a dark patch. People didn't know. The tabloids missed it. But Malcolm knew. He showed up, no camera, no tweet, just a ride across town, a conversation in a parked car, and silence when silence was the only thing that helped. That's who Malcolm was. He wasn't loud about his love. He just showed up when it counted most. And Eddie never forgot that. Even when they drifted apart, life pulling them in different directions, the bond stayed. You could feel it when Eddie spoke about Malcolm in passing. Always with a smile, always with that twinkle of gratitude in his eyes. And when Malcolm would mention Eddie in interviews, rarely, but meaningfully, it was always with deep respect. Eddie's the kind of brother who makes you laugh and then makes you think. He once said, "A storm with a soul." They shared books, ideas, music. They sent each other stuff that never made it to social media. Malcolm once sent Eddie a spoken word piece he'd never released. Eddie texted back, "This gave me chills." That was it. No clout chasing. Just men, artists, trying to breathe truth into a world that often rewards lies. And so when Malcolm passed suddenly, when that silence hit like a wave, and the world was still trying to process the headlines, Eddie unraveled, because this wasn't just another name in the news. This wasn't just another celebrity death. This was a friend. This was a man who had seen him, heard him, been there in the quiet when no one else knew how to be, and now he was gone. And for Eddie Griffin, who had always managed to laugh through pain, the joke was finally gone. All that was left was memory, and a bond that never needed cameras to be real. It didn't come through a dramatic headline or a front-page alert. It came quietly at first, just a whisper online, a vague post, a "did y'all hear?" in a comment section, then another, then a text, then silence, and then the flood. Malcolm Jamal Warner was gone. Gone. It didn't make sense at first. People refreshed their feeds, praying it was a hoax. We've seen so many fake deaths spread like wildfire online. Cruel rumors, misinformation. The internet played with hearts like it's nothing. So naturally, most folks refuse to believe it. Not Malcolm, not Theo, not the man who had survived the beast of childhood stardom and grown into something solid, safe, smart, steady. But then more started posting. Blue checks, journalists, friends, people in the know, and the tone shifted. Fast. The disbelief started to curdle into panic. And then it hit. The confirmation. A publicist. A family statement. Sudden. Unexpected. We asked for privacy. That was it. No details. No explanation. Just a void. And the world collectively inhaled and held its breath because there are some names you never expect to see written next to the word dead. The timeline erupted. Fans began posting clips. Young Malcolm in that iconic sweater, cracking jokes, rolling his eyes, being the teenage heartbeat of an entire generation's favorite show. Others posted poetry he'd shared in small rooms, jazz performances, that deep voice reading words most people never knew he wrote. People started realizing, maybe for the first time, just how much of Malcolm's work had gone unnoticed while he was still here. And somewhere in the middle of all that noise, Eddie Griffin was quiet. He didn't tweet. He didn't go live. He didn't post a black square or share a broken heart emoji. He went still. The live didn't start with a flashy caption. There was no promo, no countdown, no music playing in the background. Just a shaky screen, and then Eddie Griffin's face appeared. No lighting setup, no performance voice, no smile. Just swollen eyes, a heavy pause, and silence so thick it pressed through the screen and into the chest of every person watching. For a while, he didn't say anything. His eyes darted, trying to focus. His lips parted, but no words came. He looked like a man trying to breathe underwater. You could hear the comments pouring in, "We love you, Eddie. What happened? Is it true?" But he didn't answer them. He wasn't reading. He wasn't performing. He was mourning. Then finally, the silence cracked. "My heart is heavy today," he said, his voice hoarse, almost whispering. For what? A son, a poet, a musician, actor, teacher, writer, director, friend, a warrior. The words were part of what he had just posted minutes earlier on Instagram. A tribute that read like a poem and a gut punch at the same time. It wasn't polished or rehearsed. It was Eddie's soul spilled onto the screen. "A warrior," he repeated, looking down. "A warrior I had the pleasure of going to war with against the Hollywood machine. And sometimes with each other, because that's what brothers do. But the love was always there." And for the first time in alive, his voice cracked. That word, asterisk brother asterisk, lingered in the air like incense in a quiet church. You could feel what it meant. This wasn't just grief for a public figure. This was a man who had shared sacred space with someone, cried with him, fought with him, grown beside him, and now had to say goodbye in front of strangers. "You taught me so much, man," he said, wiping his face, trying to hold it together. "And thank you for everything." The room behind him was dim, just a lamp, a couch, a world that felt too still now that Malcolm wasn't it anymore. Every few minutes, Eddie would stop talking and just stare, not at the camera, but past it, like he was remembering a moment, a laugh, a joke that only he and Malcolm shared. At one point, someone must have called his phone, because a live pause glitched, then came back. Eddie laughed through the hurt. He'd hate this, he mumbled. He'd say, "Get off this phone and write something real." Then he turned serious again. He was my little brother. Eddie said, the words hanging heavy, not by age, maybe, but by spirit, by how he leaned on me sometimes, and how I leaned on him more than I ever said. People in the comments were crying, literally typing, "I'm crying, this is too real, this hurts." And it did, because Eddie Griffin wasn't just telling us Malcolm was gone. He was showing us what it looks like when a man loses someone who held space in his heart. He didn't stay on long, maybe 10 minutes, maybe 15, but it felt like a lifetime. When he ended the live, he didn't say goodbye. He didn't promote anything. He didn't smile for the camera. He just said, "Rest well, my little brother." And then he was gone. And all that remained was the silence again, that unbearable, echoing silence. Because when a man like Eddie Griffin breaks down in front of the world, it doesn't just shake the screen, it shakes the soul. It wasn't a long call, just under 20 minutes. But in hindsight, those 20 minutes now feel like a lifetime squeezed into a moment Eddie Griffin wishes he could stretch forever. He hadn't planned to talk that night. He was busy on the road, in between flights, doing what entertainers do, always moving, always performing, always giving more than they had. But Malcolm had called, and when Malcolm called, you picked up, "Yo, E, you good?" That calm, familiar voice, steady as ever. Eddie didn't know it then, but there was a weight beneath Malcolm's tone, a softness that didn't feel weak, but quiet, like the last flicker of a candle before the flame goes out. They talked like they always did, back and forth. No small talk, just real talk. No cameras, no pressure. Just two men, tired of the noise, catching their breath together. Eddie cracked a joke about a studio exec who had passed on a script years ago and now wanted a meeting. Malcolm laughed, that slow, layered laugh that sounded like he was thinking about three things at once. He always did that, laugh with a little delay, like he was filtering the world through a deeper lens. Then the conversation turned serious. Not heavy, but real. Malcolm said, "Sometimes I wonder if we ever really get to rest, E. I mean, black men in this business. When do we exhale?" Eddie paused. He remembered that moment clear as day. He didn't have an answer. He still doesn't. But what struck him, looking back, was how Malcolm kept circling around the idea of rest. Peace. Slowing down. Not giving up, never that, but letting go. He mentioned feeling tired. Not in a dramatic way. Not, "I'm done" or "I'm out." Just tired. So tired. The kind of tired that doesn't go away with sleep or silence. You ever just want to disappear for a while? Malcolm had asked, almost under his breath. Eddie had brushed it off at the time, not because he didn't care, but because they'd both said things like that before. In Hollywood, you learn how to wear your exhaustion like an accessory. You get so good at surviving, you forget what thriving even feels like. I told him, "Man, take that break." Eddie recalled, "Take a damn break." I said, "Disappear if you need to. You earned it, but come back, all right." And Malcolm had laughed again. That same delayed, layered laugh. "I always come back," he said. That was the last thing Eddie remembers him saying before they hung up. "I always come back." But he didn't. And now that line haunts Eddie more than anything else. Because maybe Malcolm knew he wasn't coming back. Maybe that call was his way of saying goodbye, without making it sound like goodbye. Maybe it was his way of handing Eddie a piece of peace, even as his own slipped away. There were no dramatic revelations, no cries for help, just a quiet conversation, full of laughter and longing, a man checking in, a brother reaching out, and Eddie, still caught in the whirlwind of life, not realizing until it was too late that he'd been handed a sacred moment. He's replayed it in his mind more times than he can count, wondering if there was something he missed, a clue, a cry, a goodbye hidden in between the pauses. But there wasn't. There was just love, unspoken but understood. And now that Malcolm is gone, that conversation has taken on a weight Eddie never asked for, a quiet ache that sits heavy in the chest. Because when someone leaves this world after handing you their last words, you don't forget them. You carry them forever. Malcolm Jamal Warner, never needed to shout to be heard. He wasn't the kind of celebrity who demanded attention. He didn't chase scandals or headlines. He didn't move with the noise. He moved with purpose. And yet, despite the silence he often chose, his presence echoed across generations. There was something about him, an honesty, a calmness, a steady brilliance. That couldn't be faked. It made him unforgettable, even when the world wasn't looking. To most people, he will always be Theo Huxtable, the wide-eyed, quick-tongued teenage son on The Cosby Show who brought humor, heart, and realness into American living rooms. He made it look effortless, that role. The comedic timing, the warmth, the way he stood out even in a cast full of legends. But what people forget is that Malcolm wasn't just playing someone special. He was someone special, even back then. He came into the spotlight at an age when most kids are still figuring out who they are. He didn't just survive that pressure. He carried it with grace. Through puberty, through fame, through the kind of attention that breaks people down. Malcolm grew up on camera, and somehow, he never let the camera change him. He stayed grounded, thoughtful, fiercely intelligent. A young man surrounded by chaos, who chose peace every time. But that was just the beginning. After The Cosby Show, the world kept trying to box him in, typecast him, keep him frozen in time as the sitcom son. But Malcolm had other plans. He stretched, he evolved, he created. While others chased the next big role, Malcolm chased truth. He poured his soul into poetry, into music, into storytelling that had depth and substance. He didn't want to be famous. He wanted to be real. And he was his jazz band, critically praised. His spoken word albums, powerful, unflinching, deeply personal. His directorial work, quietly brilliant. He didn't need applause to know his worth. He didn't need the spotlight to validate his art. Malcolm was never about the hype. He was about the message. He mentored younger artists, not with fanfare, but with intention. Behind the scenes, he encouraged young black men trying to find their voice. He showed them that you could be successful and still be soulful, that you could be vulnerable and still be strong, that you didn't have to perform your blackness for white comfort. You could stand firm in who you are, and that alone was powerful. And yet, through all of this, he remained humble, never boastful, never loud. Even as his resume grew longer, even as his artistry deepened, he stayed rooted. He walked into rooms with quiet confidence, with presence. You felt him before he even spoke. And when he did speak, you listened, because Malcolm didn't waste words. Every sentence felt measured, poetic, intentional. He stood for something. Dignity, discipline, thoughtfulness. He was proof that you could survive fame, reframe your path, and still have something meaningful to say long after the world stops paying attention. He was a man who grew into himself with elegance. No spectacle, just depth. He didn't just build a career. He built a reputation, one of integrity, of substance, of showing up fully, even when no one was watching. And now, with his sudden passing, the silence he leaves behind feels deafening, not because he was everywhere, but because his absence reveals how rare he truly was. How few men carried themselves the way he did. How few artists lived that truth without ever needing to scream it. Malcolm Jamal Warner wasn't just an actor. He was a blueprint, a reminder that greatness doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it simply exists, quietly, boldly, unshaken. And now that he's gone, the world is finally waking up to what we had. A son, a poet, a musician, a teacher, a man who didn't just live for the spotlight. He lived for something real.